What happens when a man who spent his life running finally learns to fly? It's 1976. Steve McQueen hasn't made a movie in 2 years. Hollywood thinks he's finished. His agent stopped calling. His name disappeared from the trades. But at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, Steve is climbing into a vintage biplane he restored himself. No cameras, no crew, no one watching, just him. And the sky. And a decision he's about to make at 3,000 feet that will change everything. What happened up there? What did he see? And why did he come back down a different person? This is that story. The hangar smelled like oil and metal and possibility. Steve stood in front of his plane. A 1940 Stearman biplane, yellow with red trim. He'd bought it 6 months ago as a wreck and spent every day since bringing it back to life. New engine, new cables, new fabric on the wings. Every bolt he'd turned himself. Every problem he'd solved with his own hands. It was March 1976. Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. The sun was just starting to break over the mountains east of Santa Paula. Steve ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cold. The paint was smooth. Everything was ready. He'd done his first solo flight 2 weeks ago. 15 minutes. Just took off, flew a pattern around the valley, landed. His instructor had signed him off. Said he was good, said he was a natural. Today was different. Today Steve was going up alone. No instructor, no flight plan, no destination, just flying for the sake of flying. Steve climbed into the cockpit. The seat was leather, cracked, comfortable. The instrument panel was simple. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, compass, fuel gauge. Everything he needed and nothing he didn't. He pulled on his helmet, buckled the chin strap, adjusted his goggles. His hands moved through the pre-flight checklist automatically. Fuel, mixture, throttle, magnetos. Everything in order. Steve took a breath, then another, and pushed the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught. The propeller spun. Slowly at first, then faster. The whole plane vibrated. Alive. Steve let it warm up for 5 minutes, watching the oil pressure rise, listening to the engine smooth out, feeling the power thrumming through the frame. Then he released the parking brake, added power, started rolling. The grass runway was bumpy. The plane bounced. Steve added more power. The tail came up. The bouncing smoothed out. 50 knots, 60, 70. And then the ground fell away. Steve was flying. He climbed to pattern altitude, 1,000 feet, banked left. The valley spread out below him, green fields, brown hills, the town of Santa Paula small and quiet in the morning light. His ranch was visible from here. A small cluster of buildings. The house, the barn, the hangar he'd just left. He could see Allie's car parked outside. She was probably still asleep. Didn't know he'd gone up. Steve climbed higher. 2,000 feet. 3,000. The air got colder. Thinner. The engine note changed. He leveled off at 4,000 feet. Throttled back. Let the plane settle into cruise. And then he just flew. Up here, nothing else mattered. Not Hollywood. Not the movies he'd walked away from. Not the money he'd lost or the fame he'd abandoned. Not the broken relationships or the mistakes or the years he'd wasted chasing something that was never real. Up here, there was just the plane, the sky, the horizon stretching forever in every direction. Steve banked right, looked down at the earth rotating beneath him. From this height, everything looked small. The houses, the roads, the people going about their lives completely unaware that Steve McQueen was flying overhead. He liked that. The anonymity, the irrelevance. For 44 years, Steve had been running. From poverty, from his childhood, from the fear that if he stopped moving, everything would catch up with him. And maybe it had. Maybe that's why he'd quit. Because everything finally caught up and he had nowhere left to run. But up here, it didn't feel like running. It felt like floating. Steve thought about his father, William, the man he'd never met, the ghost that had haunted his whole life. William had left before Steve was born, just disappeared. Steve used to wonder why. What kind of man abandons his own son? Now Steve understood. Not because it was right, but because he'd done the same thing. Not physically, but emotionally. He'd left Neela, left Terry and Chad, walked out because staying felt impossible. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. But maybe that could change. Maybe it wasn't too late to be someone different, someone better. Maybe that's what the ranch was about. The plains, the quiet life. Maybe it was his way of trying to break the cycle, to stop running long enough to figure out who he actually was underneath all the damage. At 10:37 a.m., the engine coughed. Steve's attention snapped back. He scanned the instruments. Oil pressure. Good. Oil temperature. Good. Fuel. Good. The engine coughed again. Lost power. Recovered. Lost power again. Steve's heart rate picked up. He was at 4,000 feet, 15 miles from the airport, over open farmland with no good places to land if the engine quit completely. He pulled back on the throttle. Reduced power. The sputtering smoothed out a little, but didn't stop. Something was wrong. Steve scanned the sky, looking for a place to land. There, a dirt road, straight. Long enough. Maybe. The engine coughed again. This time it didn't recover, just started running rough, shaking the whole airframe. Steve made his decision. He was going down. Now. While he still had some control, he banked toward the road, started descending. The engine was barely producing power now, the propeller windmilling, the plane dropping faster than he wanted. 3,000 feet, 2,000, the ground coming up fast. Steve lined up with the road. It looked narrower from here, rougher, but it was his only option. 1,000 feet, 500. The engine died completely, just stopped. Sudden silence except for the wind rushing past. Steve was gliding now, a 1,200-pound glider with terrible aerodynamics, dropping like a stone. He flared, pulled back on the stick. The plane's nose came up. The sink rate slowed. The wheels touched dirt. The plane bounced, hard, came down again, bounced again. Steve fought to keep it straight. The tail was swinging. The plane wanted to ground loop. And then it stopped. Right there in the middle of a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. Engine dead. Propeller still. Silence. Steve sat there, breathing hard, his hands shaking on the stick. He was alive. Steve unbuckled, climbed out, jumped down to the dirt road. His legs were weak. He sat down on the ground, just sat there, looking at the plane, looking at the sky he'd just fallen out of. The road was empty. No cars, no houses nearby, just fields, fence posts. A few cows in the distance watching him with mild interest. Steve started laughing. It came out shaky, half hysteria, half relief. He'd almost died, just now. If he'd been another 500 feet up when the engine quit, if he'd been over the mountains instead of the valley, if he'd panicked and tried to stretch the glide instead of landing on the road, he'd almost died. And instead of feeling scared, Steve felt alive. More alive than he'd felt in years, maybe ever. He thought about all the stunts he'd done in movies, all the dangerous things he'd insisted on doing himself. Jumping motorcycles, racing cars, fighting on moving trains. He'd always told himself it was about authenticity, about making the movie better, about being a real man instead of a fake actor. But sitting here on this dirt road in the middle of nowhere, Steve realized the truth. He'd been trying to die, not consciously, not with a plan, but subconsciously, constantly. He'd been pushing toward the edge, testing limits, seeing how close he could get to the void without falling in. Because dying felt easier than living, than dealing with the pain and the guilt and the crushing weight of being himself. But he hadn't died. The engine had quit, and he'd landed the plane, and he was sitting here breathing and alive. And for the first time in his life, Steve was glad he was still here. Steve started walking. He didn't know exactly where he was. Somewhere south of Santa Paula, maybe 10 miles from the ranch. He'd have to call someone, get a truck, tow the plane back, figure out what went wrong with the engine, fix it. But right now, he just wanted to walk. The morning was beautiful, clear, the kind of California day that tourists think happens every day but rarely does. The air smelled like grass and dust and earth. Steve put one foot in front of the other, his flying boots crunching on the dirt road, his leather jacket warming in the sun. He thought about Ali. She'd be awake by now, probably wondering where he was. Probably not worried yet. But she would be soon. He thought about his kids. Terry was 18 now. Chad was 15. Both living with Neela. Both barely speaking to him. Both probably better off without him in their lives. He thought about Neela, his first wife, the one he'd destroyed through neglect and affairs and his inability to be present. She was seeing someone new, some businessman, a good guy apparently, someone who could give her what Steve never could. Steve was happy for her, really. She deserved better than what he'd given her. After an hour of walking, Steve saw a farmhouse, pulled back from the road, mailbox at the end of the driveway. He walked up, knocked on the door. An old woman answered. 70, maybe 75. She looked at Steve, looked past him at the dirt road, looked back at Steve. "You lose something?" she asked. "My plane broke down, about 2 miles back. I need to use a phone." The woman studied him. "You're that actor, aren't you? Steve McQueen." Steve hesitated. "Yeah?" "Thought you retired." "I did." "Then what are you doing crashing planes in the middle of nowhere?" Steve smiled. "Learning to fly." The woman let him in, showed him to the phone, made him coffee while he called Ali. "Where are you?" Ali asked, worried, angry, relieved. "At a farmhouse. The plane died. I'm okay." "Jesus, Steve, you could've." "I know, but I didn't. I'm fine. Can you come get me?" Ali said she'd be there in 30 minutes. Steve hung up, sat in the old woman's kitchen, drinking coffee, looking out the window at the fields beyond. "Can I ask you something?" Steve said. "Sure. Do you know who I am? I mean really. Have you seen my movies?" The woman shrugged. "1 or 2. My husband liked them. He passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry." "It's okay. He had a good life. Worked this farm for 40 years. Raised 3 kids. Died in his sleep. Can't ask for much better than that." Steve nodded. "No, I guess you can't." Ali pulled up in their truck 40 minutes later. She got out, looked at Steve. He looked back at her. Then she walked over and hugged him. Hard. Didn't let go for a long time. "Don't do that again," she said into his chest. "Okay. I mean it. Don't crash planes. Don't almost die. Don't make me think I'm going to lose you." "I won't." She pulled back, looked at him. Her eyes were red. "You promise?" Steve thought about it. about the engine quitting, about the descent, about sitting on that dirt road realizing he wanted to live. "Yeah," he said, "I promise." They drove back to the plane, arranged for a tow truck, drove home. Steve was quiet the whole way, just looking out the window, thinking. "What happened up there?" Allie asked finally. "The engine quit. Carburetor, probably. I'll figure it out." "That's not what I mean." Steve looked at her. "I know." "So what happened?" Steve was quiet for a long time. They passed fields, past towns, past the whole ordinary world that kept turning whether Steve McQueen was in it or not. "I realized something," Steve said finally. "What?" "That I want to be here, that I want to live, not just exist, not just run, but actually live. With you, in that house, on that ranch. I want to be present. I want to try." Allie reached over, took his hand. "You're already trying." "Not hard enough." "It's a start." It took Steve 3 days to figure out what went wrong. Carburetor, a stuck float valve. Simple problem. Could have been catastrophic. He fixed it. Rebuilt the whole carburetor. Tested it. Reinstalled it. Tested the engine on the ground for hours. Then he flew again. Not far, just around the pattern. 20 minutes, but he did it. Got back in the plane that almost killed him and flew. Because that's what you did. You got back up. You tried again. You didn't let fear win. Allie watched from the hangar, arms crossed, worried. But she didn't try to stop him. When Steve landed and taxied back, she was there waiting. "How was it?" she asked. "Good. Really good." "You going up again? Tomorrow? Every day?" "Probably." Allie smiled, shook her head. "You're crazy." "Yeah, but I'm here." "Yes, you are." Steve flew almost every day after that. Morning flights, afternoon flights. Sometimes he'd take Allie up. Sometimes he'd go alone. He never became a great pilot, just a good one. Competent. Safe. Someone who respected the plane and the sky and his own limitations. But flying changed him. Gave him something he'd never had before. A place where the past didn't matter. Where fame meant nothing. Where the only thing that existed was the present moment and the simple act of keeping a machine in the sky. It was meditation, therapy, religion, all rolled into one. And for a man who'd spent his life running, who'd almost died running, flying was the closest thing to peace he ever found. Up there, Steve wasn't a movie star, wasn't a failure, wasn't a bad father or a worse husband. He was just a man, in a plane, in the sky, alive. Present. Finally, after all those years, exactly where he was supposed to be.